Mayor Bill de Blasio has released his fiscal year 2016 executive budget, as well as his administration's first iteration of the city's 10-year capital plan. And with $78 billion on the table, there is much to know, understand, and analyze, especially when some elected officials, unions, and nonprofit organizations got good news and some not so good.
Well, to break down the budget, which still won't be final until the mayor and the city council have done a little more negotiating, and to help us understand how it differs from previous budgets, we want to welcome James Bheard. He's the Deputy Director and Chief Economist for the Fiscal Policy Institute. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
It's a lot to digest, so we're looking forward to getting into this.
Okay, well, back in February, we did get a look at the preliminary budget.
Right.
So what are some of the positive changes that have been maintained or in this executive budget have changed?
Yeah, well, there's additional assistance provided to the Housing Authority, which had been underfunded for a long time, not that well managed. Mayor de Blasio is making progress in terms of addressing some of the maintenance backlogs and importantly, trying to put the Housing Authority's financial situation on a firm footing. So he made, a couple of important steps forward in the executive budget proposal. He also, further increased rental assistance to help people who are either poised to go into the homeless shelter system or to come out of that, expanding rental assistance for homeless, vulnerable households. He increased funding for Rikers Island to deal with some of the need for increased staffing and training there because they've had lots of problems there. And problems have actually been around for a while, but they're sort of first being addressed.
So there's always the big thing that makes the news, the winners and the losers column.
Right.
And there was sort of a reversal. And I want to, in your opinion, was this like more political theater? Last week, there were some council members standing on the steps saying we need more money for like after school programs and get these youth things. And then 2 hours later, it's like the money is coming through. Everyone wins. Your council people are fighting for you. And we have a mayor that listens. Like,
yeah, so this was a variation of what used to be sort of an ingrained part of the budget process called the budget dance, where the mayor would not continue to fund things that the council had fought to have in the budget when it's adopted the previous year, would make the council fight all through the budget hearings.
It's like, look at this.
In March and May and June and so on, and then lo and behold, come the end of June, a lot of those things would be restored. So Mayor de Blasio, because of the enhanced overall revenue picture for the city, and the outlook for the budget is probably better now than what it's been literally in decades. So he's been able to restore a lot of those things that the council year in and year out has fought for. This was one area, after school funding for summer programs in middle schools, that the mayor hadn't restored the funding on, and the council said, hey, we thought the budget dance was over, so they marshaled forces, brought a lot of advocates, brought kids who would be affected by if these programs were not funded and so on. And the mayor knew that he was, on the defensive on that, and there are revenues to restore something like that. So he said, let's agree to this and move on and deal with the other things.
We have like $1 billion in the lockbox now, right? He was able to put away $1 billion for a rainy day.
Well, so he's added to the general reserves in the city budget. He's added to something called the Retiree Health Benefit Trust Fund, which is needed to repay to pay the health benefits of retirees, but it's also been used in the past as sort of a form of rainy day fund. And he set up a new capital stabilization reserve fund, which is the first time that's been done. There's $500 million in that. There's still, he's still showing on the books some out-year projected budget gaps, but he does have a lot of reserves. And this year's budget, the fiscal 15 budget, will end with about a $3 billion surplus, which will be used to reduce debt service expenses, the interest cost and retiring debt that the city has to pay in next year's budget.
Okay. We sort of alluded to this question off air when we asked you before, but I said the CBC is worried that Mr. de Blasio's budget may not be sustainable, especially if there is an economic downturn. So would that be a cause for concern, especially with the excess?
It's hard to protect against any, no matter how severe economic downturn. Certainly, Mayor Bloomberg had taken a lot of steps in 2006 and 2007 before the recession hit to put away money in much the same way that Mayor De Blasio is doing now. That recession turned out to be, it was the Great Recession for good reason, the longest and the most severe downturn since the 1930s. So even in that environment, those reserves helped, but weren't enough. So in a way, the CBC is saying that if we had something as bad as that, this is not good enough. But I'm an economist. I follow what other economists are saying. Many economists were wrong about the Great Recession. I was worried about it. I wasn't projecting that it was going to be as bad as it was. But so barring anything as bad as that, which no one is really projecting at this point, I think the fiscal outlook for the city is as secure as it's been. You'd have to go back to the 1960s to see it as good as this. And partly it's because the city's economy on the whole is doing pretty well. This might actually turn out to be the first expansion, the first period of economic growth since the 1960s that hasn't relied exclusively on Wall Street and the boom on Wall Street. So that's a very positive thing. We're starting to see wages go up.
And before we get too far into the alphabet soup of the thing, CBC.
Citizens Budget Commission.
So where's this extra revenue coming from? Because New York is that town where we look downtown to see how the bonuses are, where the tax money's come. So where is that extra bump coming from generally?
Well, so the financial markets have been doing pretty well the last few years. So part of it is capital gains revenue from people being able to sell stocks at a higher price than what they bought. The market is up considerably from the low point in 2009. We're in the midst of a real estate boom, which has its pluses and minuses, right? I mean, it's made New York City increasingly a very unaffordable place for many average New Yorkers to live, but there's been a boom at the luxury end of the residential market and somewhat of a boom in the commercial real estate market. So that generates, there are lots of real estate transactions that New York City taxes, property tax growth has been rising, and so on. So as well as the fact that the income tax incomes are rising, across the board. So we've seen some, improved, the last few years, New York City taxes have been growing about 5 or 6% a year. That's pretty good.
Okay. So I have one question. A minute ago, you alluded to Bloomberg sort of socking away money in some of those same ways that the mayor is, but we have this sort of billionaire communications magnate and Bill de Blasio, who has this public service background, Tale of Two Cities thing. How do their styles differ, and where does the rubber meet the road with that in terms of budget stuff?
Well, I think in terms of their overall fiscal responsibility, they both have been pretty good. One thing that's different now is that one of the things that Bloomberg did was when the city's economy improved and tax collections rose, he allowed for some tax reductions, some tax cuts, reduction in the property tax rate and so on. Although, on the plus side, he said these are temporary as long as we can afford these. When we can't afford those, they're going to end, and that's what happened. Mayor de Blasio hasn't done that. He's been using, on the other hand, he's been using strong revenue growth to make up for some underinvestment. There were lots of reductions in human services spending, everything from senior citizens programs, youth programs, homeless expenditures, and so on, that declined about 10% in the wake of the recession at a time when needs were growing significantly. Mayor Bloomberg, cut back in spending in that area. Mayor de Blasio has been restoring some of that. So he's addressing some long-standing needs, like with the homeless situation, with the housing authority, and so on. And of course, it's only been a year now, but people shouldn't lose sight of the fact that he made this major initiative to implement across the board universal pre-K,
which was more expensive than he even anticipated.
Which was expensive, and now in the fall it will be the second and the final phase of fully implementing that. A pretty remarkable job in terms of civic management anywhere in the country. Now, He was lucky he was able to get the state to pay for that.
That's
he didn't
where
even
the
have to
next
pay for that out of
question is,
city
though.
revenues. He had proposed an income tax surcharge on high-income earners, who I would argue, probably could have sustained that without any difficulty. The governor had other ideas, opposed that. But in the end, what resulted was that the state agreed to pay for this expansion in New York City, which, when you think about it, is probably the biggest increase in state aid to New York City in a long time. So again, kudos to the mayor for the proposal and for sort of navigating that through Albany last year. A lot of people said he really sort of got his head handed to him. He got the state to pay for it.
Well, I know that I want to get into the relationship between those two, the sort of frenemies thing and how much the state should be kicking in. And Aaron has been waiting all day to talk about the police thing. So you can lead us where you want.
I wasn't even going to go to that one. Yeah, I was going to say that. Before we get into the police thing, because we did mention it earlier, can you tell us what Mayor de Blasio has in for his 10-year capital plan for the city?
Right. So,
And the police.
What he had in preliminary budget was pretty preliminary on that score. So he sort of unveiled, more of the details of his 10-year capital plan. That totals $83 billion.
Yeah.
It's a pretty significant increase over the last 10-year capital plan in the city. The biggest beneficiary of that spending is schools and the education system. And the second is the Department of Environmental Protection, which oversees water mains. A lot of people are concerned about these 100-year-old water mains and so on.
Yeah.
Wastewater treatment. We have lots of problems when it rains really hard, like it is today. Of storm water being released, untreated into the waterways. Yeah. And then there's a lot of money for bridges and highways, and there's $8 billion for affordable housing. And part of the way he's proposing to pay for that is with a mansion tax, a little bit of an increase in the transaction tax on the sale of residential units that cost over $1,700,000, slightly higher rate for those over $5 million. The IBO released an analysis today that said that 98% of the residential units that will bear that burden are in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Where the average price for a condo now is just north of $1 million. So it's like if you buy in, that's just the average.
Again, that's the sort of the part of the housing market situation in New York City is that a lot of demand at the top, and that effectively pulls up prices across the board and exacerbates the affordability problem for average New Yorkers.
Not so much our problem.
Yeah, not so much our problem. Not yet. And can you tell us about the law enforcement? Is that addressed in the
there's a
budget?
continuing dispute this year. Last year, the council said, reflecting the concerns of council members from areas where there's still a lot of concern about crime, although granted the situation of crime has improved a lot over the last 10 or 20 years in New York City as a result of a lot of things, but including a very effective police force overall. Although there was a lot of concerns about the stop and frisk, and I think the mayor has reduced that significantly, although there's still issues there. The council said, though, reflecting the fact that in certain neighborhoods crime is still a really important problem that constituents are looking to be addressed, had pressed for funding to hire an additional 1,000 police officers. The mayor last year said, we don't think that that's necessary. They compromised on a smaller increase in the number of, in changes that would put more police on the street, although far short of 1,000. Yeah. So the council is raising that again this year. The mayor, in his executive budget proposal, didn't include funding for that. The police commissioner, is out there saying that we could certainly use more funding to increase the police force.
What else is he going to say?
The mayor indicates an openness to talk about this. As with a lot of things in the budget, his executive budget proposal has to be negotiated, as you've talked about, and that's taking place now. So something might come out of that represents another attempt at compromise between the council and the mayor.
So James, we're completely out of time, but I want just like a 3-word answer on this. Looking at where the money is going, who does Bill de Blasio think his constituency is in the city?
I think the entire population of the city. I mean, it's
So
a
you
pretty
see the
balanced
one New York
approach.
City.
Right.
Okay, done, perfect. Tale of Two Cities ended. He's bringing it together.
All right, and the city in De Blasio will finalize the budget by the 9th, June 9th.
Well, the last hearing is on June 9th. They have until June 30th, so somewhere in between there, we'll see a handshake and a kiss between the mayor and the speaker.
All right, well, the dancing continues.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, thank you so much.